Welcome to Trailblaze. I'm Jamal Simmons.
And I'm Nayyera. We are here today to bring a conversation to you about the America that we are becoming.
Yeah, this is a place where we're going to look at some of the big stories that are driving our politics. We're also going to talk about the important stories that are driving the culture. And, we can't forget there are a bunch of people out there who are fighting against the America that we're becoming and trying to take us backwards.
Now, for context, you may think that we are very young. Thank you. But Jamal and I have been around for a minute. We have served in senior places like the White House and Congress, and now the PTA is part of our life too. But Jamal is also the older one. Don't forget that.
Yeah, that's going to be hard for people to forget. But I'm also the one who will take us on to our first topic. So I think our first topic is going to be pretty fun. This is not just, it feels like every couple of days around here is right now like an entire week or month in politics. And so we've seen a lot of things happen. Of course, obviously, this is our first episode of the podcast. So what we know is we've got a brand new candidate on the Democratic side who wasn't even in the race 2 months ago, but everybody's so excited about her, Kamala Harris, and Donald Trump, who's still around. What day did he come down the elevator? What year was that? 2016, 2015?
I just see that image repeating in my mind over and over, but I put that now to like the crazy circus music.
I know.
That's the feeling that the continued Donald Trump campaign gives me. And to your point, people are excited about Kamala Harris, not just who are Democrats or the 41 million new voters who are joining the rolls this year, but also many of the conservatives find her to be a much easier target than Biden.
Yeah, one thing that's happening right now, which, we always think of election day is going to be in November and everybody's getting ready for the push to November. But what happens now these days is election day comes a lot earlier because the ballots go out so soon. And we've already got ballots being released in states. We've also got polls that are showing what people talk about as a tight race in some of these battleground states. But in the national numbers, we're really starting to see Kamala Harris separate a little bit. Looks like some of these numbers are showing her with a 4 or 5 point lead in the national race. But does that really matter? Is it really going to help her win this election there?
Right, because it depends on election day itself, who actually feels motivated or enthusiastic enough to get off of the sofa, even if it's raining, to go cast a vote for somebody. And that's going to be the difference maker, is that enthusiasm gap between both candidates. I think that's the 4 to 5 points that we're seeing right now. I just think it's remarkable that we're in this place where the United States is actively considering electing a Black, South Asian, prosecutor who doesn't have any children, right? These are not the stereotypes of the type of even woman we were told could run for public office. And I truly don't think that if we'd had 2 years to overanalyze and overthink ourselves, that we would be in this place right now. So I love this idea of this really short sprint to the finish line. And like you said, the reality is people are voting now on who they want to be president next. So does the next 50 days, is anybody really undecided? Don't people know who these two people are? It's not that you don't know who the candidates are and how you feel about them. It's whether or not you're going to bother to show up.
Yeah. And look, we, what we know is you said, very briefly, she doesn't have any kids, which is true. She never had kids. But she's a member of this big blended family that I think a lot of Americans are now living in. And I think as we talk about like how we're becoming more educated and how we're becoming, we've got more women leaders and all those things are starting to happen to us. We've also got these families that just don't look like that kind of 1950s television, stock family that everybody saw in the footage. And people are now, I think, are just more open. And that's a lot of what we want to talk about here is how it's not just that we have these political leaders, whether it's Barack Obama or, Hillary Clinton, but it's also that the society is changing and the society is producing all these new combinations. So listen, if you watch television, just watch a basketball game, just watch a reality TV show, the advertisements that you see on those shows are also interesting. They are blended families racially. They are LGBTQ families. They are, one kid is
commercial, right? And this isn't some agenda that's being put on people. It's actually a reflection of the people who are consumers, right? The majority consumers. And by the end of this election, it's not going to be boomers or people 55 plus, right? Everyone talks about seniors voting. It's 18 to 45. That's a totally different demographic. And frankly, we communicate differently too. This is part of the, I think, the disconnect you hear from cable news, even when we're sitting next to people who just don't seem to understand that abortion is now a family value issue. That's how it's discussed at the kitchen table right now. It's
Yeah,
not.
and you know, when we talk about abortion, people don't talk about. Listen, this is an issue that obviously impacts women in the most intimate and personal way. It is an issue that women ought to have the biggest say on. It is the issue that, you know, really we don't want the government in the doctor's office or
I
the
love how
woman
you're
as she's
saying that as like a
making this
checklist
choice.
of things you have to say. But here's the
But like,
thing.
but all
Those
these things
things
are true.
actually need to be said right now because it's no longer assumed by the government or people in government that those things actually matter.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's also true that that in so many men, I mean, frankly, probably men of multiple generations, but men of even my generation, when we get in the quiet room, when we talk about this, we're impacted by abortion too.
Mm-hmm.
How many of us have had our lives that unfolded in a way because some woman we were involved with, the woman at a time, chose to make the choice that she made instead of
Mm-hmm.
making a choice to have a child? And so I think men are invested in this. People who have daughters and sons are invested in this. And I think when you talk to and people who love their, you know, their wives, because more women who have already had kids are having kids,
Mm-hmm.
or daughters, say that I hear this from people. When you acknowledge the fact that men care about women and they want women to have this choice, they feel seen because they feel like they too want to fight off the government bureaucrats who want to get in that doctor's room with the women they love and the doctor who are trying to figure out what to do to keep her healthy.
Well, this whole idea, right, of the in the debate where Kamala Harris mentioned the woman who was bleeding out in the parking lot, right? Like that fear of what can happen during pregnancy. I mean, throughout human civilization, it's been the most dangerous thing that can happen to a woman's body is pregnancy. And we are so lucky and privileged that we have access to some of these healthcare tools in the US. And what they ended up doing systemically was to eliminate the ability of doctors and women and families, right? Partners, husbands, guys, to make those decisions about what happens if I'm carrying a dead fetus. Seriously, you're going to tell me I have to physically birth that now? Right? Like what the idea that this
And then here's how nuts these people are. This is how nuts they are. First, they want to tell you whether or not you can do it. And then if it does happen, they're going to go make you go through these hoops to try to get your body healthy because you've had this very traumatic experience of having a miscarriage. And if you talk to anybody who's had a miscarriage, it does feel as the trauma is real. But then some of these people want you to have a burial service for a fetus that never even made it to anything close to term.
listen,
That's how much
do what you got to do.
they want to do to interfere in the lives of people who are just trying to
Yeah,
have the
and
families
there's
they
a
want.
reason why we have these medical and scientific terms. Embryo, fetus, baby is after birth, right? And it's
Right,
important because seed and tree are not the same thing either. One is potential, one is the actual thing, right? So
right.
it's this idea of what the potential could be of these two cells that now are breaking down to make an embryo. And they got to the point in their logic about where life starts that they're like, no, you can't do IVF.
So
Because,
here's the
right, like
so here's
the
the
whole IVF thing, I'm like, that is literally the most pro-life, pro-family thing you can do with medicine, right? And this whole idea that Amy Comey Barrett, as Justice said, that we need a domestic labor supply. Why would you not allow science and medicine then to help families do that with IVF?
absolutely. And here are the politics of this. You know, I was in the White House in 2022. I was the vice president's communications director. And in 2022, everyone kept saying the most important issue on the ballot this year is going to be the economy. The economy is what's driving it. Inflation is what's driving it. Big issues. People care about them a lot. They're very important issues. What we began to understand is that there were a cohort of Americans out there who also thought having control of their bodies was also a really important issue, right? And like that issue was going to drive the election. So democracy on one hand, abortion on the other. And we saw states, you saw this,
Mm-hmm.
Nayyera, we saw these states in Kansas and Michigan and these places that are supposed to be battleground or even ruby red, like
Red
Kansas
states.
and Ohio, making choices to say, no, keep your government bureaucrats out of my doctor's office.
And this used to be the Republican and libertarian argument, right? It was anti-government, government, personal liberty, none of that should be government's role. You can dislike it on a personal level. Like, no one's telling you what birth control you should use or what decisions you should make about a pregnancy, but certainly they would say definitely not government. And what we saw, where we are now with the Republican Party, is that is the Christian nationalist view, evangelical view that is dominating, rather than is this government's role or not? And that tension is so obvious now. And what I find to be bonkers is somehow Vice President Kamala Harris, the Democratic nominee, is up there using what used to be the Republican talking points about keep government out of my personal business.
Absolutely. So my question for you is, this year, where we have this on the ballot, or we have a candidate on the ballot who is running on this issue in a big way, do you think it's going to have the same impact in 2024 that it had in 2022 when the Democrats were able to unexpectedly win a Senate seat and hold down losses in the House? Do you think
I think
it's going to
so.
matter?
And I think what the disconnect is oftentimes with polling is the polling doesn't talk or connect with people who are infrequent or new voters necessarily, right? Like I said, 41 million people new. Taylor Swift got 300,000 new people to register to vote. The culture war that is happening right now is not just about what our kids are reading in elementary school. It truly is about what is the government's role in people's bodies? What are the issues where government hits home? Sure, grocery prices, absolutely. I don't like having to, spend like $10 on apples in the week because my kids are apple monsters and they only want to eat Honeycrisp apples. Like, I get that.
Oh, you're bragging now. Now you're just bragging about your kids liking fruit.
Yes, I am very lucky.
My daughter begs for lollipops.
My kid eats olives and pickled onions. Little, the little fancy 8-year-old palate here. But I get it because, like, I literally, yes, like we do this thing and we've, done all the fancy stuff.
And so for those of you who are not watching at home, Nayyera tried to murder her camera a minute ago. Yeah. But I think the camera fought back and it's back on its feet.
It's a miracle my children survived past babyhood, and that's truly, truly a credit to my husband with how clumsy I can get with things. But the idea of how these issues come together in people's daily lives, I think pollsters, politicians who are just so disconnected from, frankly, the birthing years and the family years. The average age of a U.S. senator is 61 years old. That's at least 30 years past prime starting a family years, right? So like that big disconnect.
Not for boys.
Though apparently the little boys that you men carry around, after around 60, they get a little janky too. So you got to watch out.
Yeah, that's what they say. Mm-hmm. So listen, all right. So we think that this year it's going to matter. The polls are showing Harris is pulling ahead. Now the question, I saw this poll in Iowa where the vice president closed the gap with Donald Trump to 4 points. Donald Trump beat Joe Biden in Iowa by 18% in the 2020 election. If it's down to 4, that means that there are a bunch of voters that people aren't thinking about who are moving in her direction. And to me, that's something that we ought to be paying attention to, because even if she doesn't win Iowa, if she has Iowa within 4 and she has Texas within 4 or 5 and she has, all these states that are supposed to be completely lost in Florida, I think, which is now like inside the margin of error. If that's happening, that means something big is happening.
Okay. Can we pause right there though for a second and just make a caveat acknowledgement up front that we have this fucked up thing with the Electoral College where very specific counties end up counting much more than actually the majority of what people think. The idea that you can be the popular elected president and not actually hold office should not be okay. With that said, play the game, the rules you have, right? Play the cards that you have. She is now running the old Obama play, which is using her vigor and her energy and the enthusiasm of like, what is she? Who is she? What's going on? That people want to show up and they want to connect with, to go to multiple states in the same day, multiple stops in places where she shouldn't be thinking about winning. And it's not about winning those counties. It's actually about suppressing the enthusiasm for the other guy, right? So these are the two ways to play it. It's turning out and it's also suppression. On the Trump side, I mean, their voter suppression is obvious, right? Just demonize migrants, immigrants, and by extension, anybody who might look like they fall in that category, right? And then use the fear of what's happening in big cities to drive people to the polls, right? So like the fear and the suppression of the vote is also a key part of this. It's not just who I'm casting a ballot for.
No, that's absolutely right. And what we're seeing in these states is it looks like the Republicans have hired about 150 lawyers they're going to put into 15 battleground states. And in those battleground states, they're going to then organize a bunch of volunteers. So they're going to do three things. The first thing they'll do is to try to challenge ballots at the ballot box. Say like, hey, these people shouldn't be able to vote while they're trying to vote. The second thing they do is they go to the county election board, to the city election board, and they say, hey, these votes are being counted in a bad way. So they're going to try to throw ballots out that night. And the third thing is they're collecting evidence to then go into courts and to do lawsuits after election day and see if they can get some of these ballots thrown out. So in some ways, they're not even trying to win on election day. They're just, as you just said, trying to suppress the vote by intimidating people, suppress the vote by stopping them from being able to vote on election day, and then throw out their ballots after the fact in lawsuits, and then hope they get it close enough that the House of Representatives or some conservative judges or somebody can declare, the referees can declare,
and who
a
are the
victory
referees?
on election day.
The referees are often appointed, right? These are not the elected judges. These are the appointed judges that have been appointed by whoever happened to be the president at the time, right? So they were very systemic in making sure in certain places they had the right type of judge with the right type of perspective that would support this idea of, frankly, limiting access to the ballot box, right? Felons being able to vote. If you have done your time, why should you be denied the most fundamental right as a citizen, which is to be able to elect and vote for the people who are going to make the laws and run your life, right? The most fundamental thing as a U.S. citizen. But even if you've done your time, they want to deny you the right to vote. And the effort was made to get people counted again in Florida and in other states. And in Florida ended up being above 1 million people. That is game changing in Florida. But certain judges who were appointed by certain people tried to put a stop to that. I think it's very important, I would tell our listeners, to listen for the candidates that talk about making voting easier and more accessible, having a day off to go vote. That's federally mandated. Like you can't get docked pay for trying to go vote, longer voting hours, all of that. If they're arguing against making it easy, I've literally heard people say, well, you should care enough to make an effort.
Okay.
That's the coded language about what ends up being an argument for voter suppression.
Absolutely. All right. Before we go, I do want to get you on one more thing because I think this is something that impacts all of us. Obviously, we are people of color. You're in a mixed race family. We live in communities that are very diverse. Meanwhile, we have one presidential candidate.
Let's be clear. I am the diversity in my community. Let's be very clear about that.
Well, and that too makes you a trailblazer. One of the other reasons why you are blazing a trail, my friend. But there's the one presidential candidate who is traveling around the country with a woman named Laura Loomer, who is a purveyor of some of the most backward-looking ideas that we have heard in politics, and many people talk about her even being, just being one of the harshest people that's out there. But the president, former president Donald Trump, is traveling around with this woman, and we think that she may be the source of some of the worst things that he's been saying lately. My question for you is this. People hear and think vile things. Should we allow those people to say those things in public so we could have the public debate and bat them down? Or is it just so harmful in this social media environment where these ideas take on a life of their own that if we platform these people, are we mainstreaming them and making them more acceptable, allowing more people to believe the harshest?
Okay, so there's two things, right? There's the idea of who are you uplifting and how are you actually regulating and moderating. So I think content moderation is important. I think there should be some standards when you sign up for a community, whether online or locally, of how you behave and treat each other. That said, it gets very quick from online to a podium with somebody running for president. And that's the dangerous thing right now. There's no regulating that. That is, you just make bad choices, right? That is a really bad choice for the country. But for whatever reason, Donald Trump finds it entertaining, right? Like to have this woman hanging around him. I mean, she looks the part. Melania's not there, but Laura Loomer is there. You
Right.
know, the Secret Service is talking about now how their access to Trump playing golf has been too easy. It's been insecure for a long time, and people like this online hack can just show up and start hanging out with a candidate and former president of the United States. So that is a judgment thing, which is where now we as voters need to check that. Like that is our social obligation.
Well, and
But the
speaking of
danger comes
judgment, and
in
speaking
how
of
quickly it spreads. Also, have you noticed I refuse to say her name because that is also platforming.
that's
There's some
true.
people
That's
who
true.
love
I take
they
it
don't
back.
care if it's a hate watch or a hate click. They just want the eyeballs. And Trump is one of those. So is this woman. They don't care. They just want the attention that we're giving them.
So speaking of bad things, these are the same people who right now have been demonizing immigrants from a Caribbean country, demonizing these people and saying that they are eating pets, said it on the debate stage, a fact that we know is not true, or a claim we know is not true. They've been saying that people are now having schools closed, they're being attacked on the streets, and instead of having someone who aspires to be the leader of the free world, who's supposed to maintain order, he's actually stoking an environment that's creating disorder.
Well, so it's totally going to backfire. Unfortunately, not in time for these poor folks in Ohio to, feel safe again. But it is going to backfire because that same Caribbean community in Florida is 500,000 voters strong, right? They're one or two generations removed from the original island, and they tended to vote conservative. Oh, I guarantee you in Florida, after hearing their identity attacked and demonized like this, they're not thinking of voting for Donald Trump anymore. The other part of this, there actually is a real problem that we have here of how do you work with influxes of people into a community? Seriously, like how do you deal with the infrastructure? How do you deal with the schooling? These are people who are working, they are contributing, they are paying rent. So they are part of the community. They stand out because they look different. And that's the part that needs help, that even the senator of that state doesn't seem to care to help that. He just wants to make the problem worse for the city.
No, it's disturbing in every way possible. And as we near closer to election day and we think about who's going to lead our country and who our kids are going to look up to and who we watch on the news, it's just the most important choice I think people have to make. So I'm
Jamal,
glad to
I
be able to
wanted
talk
to
about it with you, though, because it's been great to be here and get this off the ground so the two of us can maybe do this a recorded version of our telephone calls.
This is literally the conversations that you and I have when we're coming off a TV set or we, sitting having 5 minutes to actually follow news or think of something. And how many calls have we had where we're talking politics of the day, trying to figure out what we can do in our role, and then there's some kids screaming for dinner or hanging off our legs. I'm like, all right, that actually takes priority too. So I love that we're going to be able to do this together. I did actually have a question for you though, Jamal,
Sure.
because we have between us some pretty fancy titles and fancy places, but don't ever consider ourselves to be fancy like that. And I've never forgotten where my parents came from and all of the crazy things I had to learn even to just fit into the system. Like I was the intern who never left because I thought this stuff was so interesting and mattered so much and I could see the impact good government can have on people. But I was also the intern who grew up on Staten Island of South Asian descent. So like double bling, right? Everything double shiny effect. And so my eyeshadow was really sparkly. My pants were too tight. My heels were probably too big, right? And this was not an era where it was, oh, come as you are and we celebrate it, right? This was conservative Washington. So yeah, I had to learn that there's a way to dress the part and sound the part for people to take me seriously. Did you have that when you were coming up in the system too?
Oh, I absolutely did. And for me, it was sitting in meetings where people were using words that I had no idea what they meant, and everybody else seemed to know exactly what they were talking about. The one that in particular I remember was the word Sherpa. Somebody was the Sherpa of a policy or a deal, and they were like, "Oh, so and so is going to be the Sherpa." And I was sitting there, and I was like, "What is that word? Is that is that English? Like, what are they talking
Well,
about?"
it's not. So you were
It's
right
not
there. It's not
actually
English.
English, right? But like, what does this mean? And so I literally wrote it down on a notebook, and then I had to later go and ask somebody what Sherpa was. They looked at me and they were like, "Oh, it's like the guide who helps you climb Mount Everest." So, oh, right, yeah, because I would totally know that coming from the west side of Detroit, where, and where we were just trying to like get to the corner store without being hit by a car.
Yeah, or also known as the person who actually gets there first and sets something up and then comes back down to get, probably the older white dude up there so he can take credit for the climb. But hey, that's a conversation for another day.
Right, exactly. They make it all work for everybody else. The Sherpa, and so everybody knew the job. Everybody knew what that meant, except for the little brown kids who was sitting on the side of the room.
Well, we learned.
But we learned. We're still here. But so Nayyera, thank you for doing this with me. It's going to be great. I'm looking forward to it a lot. We have to thank our friend Brian Mathis, who was the person who introduced us years ago.
Ooh, what a character.
And we sat all at a table, which was supposed to be a 15-minute catch up. And I think we were there for like 2.5 hours. So they finally kicked us out of the place. So that was fun.
Well, maybe we'll return to that one day with one of these recordings and pick the same spot. And, maybe there'll be a cigar or two like there may have been that day.
Exactly. We bring our spouses and kids, and then people will sit around and we can not be able to talk at all because we'll be paying attention to the children instead of talking about politics. But thank you for being here at Trailblaze with us. And to keep up, please watch us on the Politicon YouTube channel or follow Trailblaze on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts.
And make sure that not only do you subscribe, but also give us a 5-star rating. That way we get to do more of these with you.
That's right. And you can follow me on Real Jamal Simmons on Twitter and Jamal Simmons on Instagram. And I look forward to being back with you, Nayyera, next week.
And I am Nayyera at Nayyerroar. Woman gonna roar even if she's a meow cat lady.
All right. Goodbye, y'all. Thank you. See you next week.